All right, this is Honors Algebra 2 Pre-Calc. We're doing homework review for the Chapter 6 homework that we have during this COVID-19 school closure. It's 6.4, number 73, which is on page 463. So in this problem, we're given two vectors, right? We're given vector u as the cosine of 7 pi over 4 I, right, in the I direction, plus the sine of 7 pi over 4 j. So what this is this is in ij notation, but what's worth noting here is that this tells us that the angle of this vector is 7 pi over 4, right? This is the trig form of a complex number, right? So while there's, or this is the trig form of a vector, rather, sorry. So while you could rewrite this as, for instance, a root 2 over 2i minus a root 2 over 2j, it doesn't actually benefit you to do so. Like, this is better, okay? So it's worth noting that this vector is at angle 7 pi over 4. Vector v that we're given is the cosine of 5 pi over 6 I plus the sine of 5 pi over 6 j. Now, again, you could rewrite this as the mathematical equivalent, which would be a negative root 3 over 2i, right? And plus a 1/2 j, right? And that's totally fine, but it doesn't help you. Like here, this is the easier form, and here's the reason. What they ask us in number 73, right? They ask us to find the angle between these two vectors. Well, you know that angle u is at the angle of 7 pi over 4, and you know that angle v is at the angle of 5 pi over 6. So if we draw this, 7 pi over 4 is here. It's the 45-degree angle, or the, you know, the pi over 4 that's in the fourth quadrant. So that's 7 pi over 4. So this is my vector v, right? Or sorry, my vector u, my bad. All right, sorry, vector u, right? And vector v is at 5 pi over 6, which is right here, right? That's the 30-degree angle, or the pi over 6 angle that happens in quadrant 2. So that's vector v. So when they talk about the angle between the two vectors, they want this angle. Let's call that theta. They want the angle that is lower, that is fewer than 180 degrees, or equal to 180 degrees. So we don't want an angle we don't want the other side of the angle. We want this angle right here. Well, the easiest way to find that angle, since we already know that this angle is 7 pi over 4 and that this angle is 5 pi over 6, we can find the angle between these two vectors without using a crazy formula. We can just say, wait a second, theta is this angle minus this angle. Right, and if I get a common denominator of 12, which is the easiest one to get here, I get 21 pi over 12 minus 10 pi over 12, and I get that the angle between these two vectors is an 11 pi over 12, and that's by far the easiest way to do this question. There are other ways to do this question. The other way to do this question is to look at the formula that's given in 6.4 on page 441, I believe, but if you do that, it's actually going to make your life an awful lot harder. So, again, if you want to find the angle between these two vectors, this is by far the easiest way to do it, because in this format, you're actually given the vectors. Now, I'm going to walk you through the other way just so you see it, but it's definitely worse. So remember, our final answer ends up being 11 pi over 12. So let me walk you through the other way of doing this. The other way of doing this is using the formula that's on page 441 that tells you that the angle between two vectors, which we'll call that angle theta, is u dot v over the magnitude of u times the magnitude of v. Now, the first easy part about this, and the rest of it isn't really easy, but this part is that both u and v are on the unit circle, right? They're both unit vectors, and you can see that because if you picture these coordinates on the unit circle, they would have a hypotenuse of 1. So both of these are a 1. So this piece is easy. This is a 1 times 1, right? This is 1 times 1. So the bottom's just a 1. What's less fun is u dot v on the top. So I have to do u dot v, and to do that, I multiply the x coordinates, right? So that's going to be a negative root 6 over 4. And I add that to what happens when I multiply the y vector coordinates, or the vertical vector, and that'll be a negative root 2 over 4. So I'm going to get that this, which is not fun at all, is a negative root 6 minus a root 2 all over 4. Now, and then technically this whole thing is all over a 1 because these denominators. So what I now have is that the cosine of theta, again, this is if I'm using the formula, I had a much easier option a second ago, right, is negative root 6 minus root 2 all over 4. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't know an immediate theta that has this, like, that gives me this cosine, right? So what's probably going to happen is you're going to have to use a calculator, which you didn't have to use doing it the other way. You're going to use a calculator, and you're going to get this, right? Like, you're going to type this whole thing in your calculator, negative root 6 minus root 2 all over a 4, right? And it is going to give you the correct angle, right? But you're probably going to be in radian mode, right? You should be in radian mode because this was all radians anyway, but we should be in radian mode, right? So you're probably going to be in radian mode, and it's going to give you an answer that you don't know how to deal with. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So if you were stuck relying on a calculator to do this, so one option is you could say, hey, forget it, I'm going to be in degree mode because that's easier for my brain. But let's say that you didn't pick that option. So I'm going to do the inverse cosine of, in parentheses, the square root of 6, close the parentheses. Oh, I'm sorry, it's the negative square root of 6. Negative square root of 6, close the parentheses, minus the square root of 2, close those parentheses, close the whole numerator, divided by 4, close that, and hit enter. I'm going to get this answer. Now that's great, but assuming that they want you to give an actual angle like they did in the answers, which again sort of proves my point that they were definitely relying on you using your knowledge of the unit circle. One easy way to deal with this, I get that my theta is approximately 2.8797 right? One way to figure out what this is I can't math frac it as it is because it has a pi in it, but if I were to divide this by pi, now what I could do is I could hit math frac, and it'll turn it into 11/12 for me. And I know that there was supposed to be a pi there because I divided by pi, so I would get an 11 pi over 12. So then, if you do it this way, you get that it is not approximately, but it is exactly 11 pi over 12, and it's the same answer that they have. Again, I wouldn't recommend this option. I think it's much easier to do the other option, but I just wanted to show you that there are different ways to get to the same answer.